Let's raise this up a little bit. Okay.
Okay.
Okay, hello everybody. We're back at Grandma's house. Today is, let me look at my, I don't know what date it is. October 20th, 2016. This is the second video in the series of videos we're going to be doing. And take it away, Grandma.
I wrote a list of what to tell you today, and I can't read the list.
Do you want me to help you?
You might have to say the word.
Okay.
It's just bullets, so what did I say
More
first?
about grace experiences. And really quickly, today we're going to be talking about, so last time we talked about Grandma's early years, and we're going to be talking about her early years again. And
this is today.
Okay, so yeah, we're going to talk about her early years, and then her first house, and then some when they moved to Pocatello. About through the 6th grade, or is that about where we're going to? Up to about 6th grade?
Probably.
Okay.
Dang, I wish I could see that after I spent
Yeah,
all
so
that
this
time
says
typing it.
more about grace experiences. And I can just, when you're done talking about that, I can tell you the next thing.
Okay, didn't I put
This says Old Polly
Oh, okay,
movies.
that's what I needed.
Oh, okay.
Is...
Neil, Scar, and Pigs.
Okay. Okay, well, the first is, now if I'm going to follow that, I won't be spontaneous, so I'm going to try to ignore it. Okay, first of all, I wanted to tell you about Old Polly, because she was such an important part of our lives at that time. She was our Holstein cow. We thought she was beautiful. We'd go out and pet her nose whenever we felt like it. And Old Polly loved to roam, and she would get out of the pasture sometimes and take a walk through town, which wasn't good. And I remember one morning my dad went out to milk. We were still in bed. My dad went out to milk the cow and couldn't find the cow. And he thought, oh no, she's gotten out again. And he had attached a long pole with 2 chains that come up around her neck, and it kind of drug almost on the ground to encourage her to stay put. Now he wants out. Do you want to let him out?
Just in the front door or the back door?
The deck.
Okay.
Anyway, he had put this on her to keep her from going all over town. Well, that morning he couldn't find her to milk her. And he got down out, Don, my big brother that was supposed to watch out for the cow or do something with the cow. He got him out of bed and was yelling at him and all that, and we all woke up and came out in the kitchen. And the kitchen, there was a low bench on one side of the room with a bucket on the bench and a glass by it. That's where we got our drinks of water and so on. And Dad was sitting on that bench with his legs crossed. He was long, lean, and lanky. Anyway, he was sitting there with his legs crossed on the bench, and tears were just streaming down his face. And we were all horrified. We had never seen our dad cry, never. I was probably 5 or 6 when this happened. So Mom said, "What's the matter, Howard?" And he said, "Go look in the canal." And so Mom and Peggy and Shirley and I went out to go look in the canal. And we went through the pasture to it. It was about a block away. And on the way, Mom would cry and Peggy would pat her shoulder. "It's okay, Mama." And then Peggy would cry and Mom would hug her and tell her it was all right. And Shirley and I were wide-eyed. We didn't know what was going on. We got out to the canal, and there was Old Polly on her side in the canal. And she had released her bowel when she died, and that was floating all over the water. I remember that so clearly. And it was even up on the bank a little bit, on the flat bank. Anyway, she was dead. And to us, that was a major, major financial blow, because half of our nutrition came from that cow. Things were really tough in those years, and food was so hard to come by In fact, I remember one day Mom came home from town pulling Don's little red wagon full of groceries. And I don't know if she'd been to the grocery store or the WPA where they gave commodities. Anyway, just as she got to the front porch, and this is across a rocky, bumpy dirt front yard, she got to the porch and the wagon tipped over and the peanut butter broke, the bottle broke. And I remember she sat on that step and put her apron up over her face and sobbed to think she had lost peanut butter. The peanut butter was probably one of the few sweet treats we ever got. And we took a peanut butter and jelly sandwich to school with us every day. So it was hard in those days, and my parents were good people, and they did the best they could. Dad had a temper, and sometimes he would turn it loose and rampage around and scare us all half to death. But it was really quite rare. I think I remember every incident, and it was scary. But he was just punishing. So that's what old Polly did for us. What's next on my list?
Movies. Do you need to take the dog out?
No, just
Okay.
ignoring. Okay, the movies. Oh, the movies. Don't you love movies? I remember my first movie so clearly. We went to Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, and I'm not sure how old I was. I was born in 1932, so whenever that movie came out, if you want to look it up, is when it was, and that's how, I think I was 4.5, 5. Anyway, we all went to the movie. We all walked down the road and into town and into the movie. Thrilling. And it appeared on the screen, and we were all just, couldn't believe it. Beautiful. And in the middle of the movie, little Snow White eats a poisoned apple. And I remember she fell to the ground, and her hand extended, and the apple rolled out of her hand. And my mother told me that at that point, I leaned over and put my head in her lap and just sobbed to think Snow White died. What's next?
Neil.
Neil. Oh, okay. When I was 5 years old, Neil was born. And we lived in the little greenhouse in Grace that I told you about. And so down the road, about 2 or 3 blocks, there was this little house. And they had turned the little house into a hospital. So there was the living room and a very small little room in the back that they used as a something or other. And the nurse was on duty. There were nurses all the time there, so Mom was never alone. But she had to stay in that hospital 10 days. And I remember we went to see her. And Dad was so proud. He had made oyster soup to take to her. And he knew she would love oyster soup. Go away, Sammy. And so when we went in, she was in bed. And she wanted to sit up and talk to us. So the nurse took a kitchen chair and turned it upside down so the back of it slanted up like that, put her pillow on it, and she propped up on that and visited with us. But I do remember that when we took that oyster soup down to her when Dad got it off the stove, I remember looking at the counters, and they were loaded with dishes and I don't know what all. So I'm sure when Mom came home, it was quite a mess. And when she came home, I remember her standing at the big old black range, the cook stove, stirring gravy or something. And she had her leg on a chair by her. You know, her knee and her lower leg were on the chair, so she was like that. And she had something they called milk leg. I have no idea what it was, but I know she dragged that chair around with her to put her leg on whenever she stood still much. And I know it was painful. The other thing I remember about those days is the washing, the laundry that Mom had to do. Peggy told me this story, and I wrote it down. And I don't want to sit here and try to tell you. Can you put it on,
Yeah.
Holly,
Yep.
so that they can read it?
Yep.
Because it's, if you want to know what a woman's life was like in those days, read the story. It's pretty scary.
Oh, I can't imagine.
So the other thing that happened along about the time Neil was born that's vivid in my memory, two things actually. One of them is, we didn't have toys like that, so we made our own play. And Don hooked my cousin Wilma and I, they were living with us then, hooked me and Wilma and I up so that we were like a team of horses. And then he was driving us, and we ran through the barn and ran here and there. And then there was this low window where they pitched hay into the barn. It was the straw barn. And he had us jump up on that window ledge. And he said, okay, now you're going to jump down on the other side. And I don't think it was much higher than that. It wasn't very high. Anyway, we got up there, and he said, now, don't one of you jump first or somebody will get hurt. When I count to 3, then you could jump. Well, my devious little mind, I thought, I wonder what would happen if I did jump first.
Oh, no.
So he said 1, 2, and I jumped. And Wilma was pulled down with me, and somehow or other she was hurt and bled all over the place.
No.
And I looked at her and I thought, I will never, ever do anything mean like that again. I don't think I have. It really scared me. The other story is also about that old straw barn that sat it down in the middle of the pasture. And it had timbers and wire on it, and then they stuffed it all with straw. It was a straw barn. And so one day my little friends Leo Rasmussen and Loyal Van Vliet came over to play. Shirley was in school in 1st grade. So we went out to the pasture and went into that straw barn. There was a mother pig out in the pasture, big mother sow, and she had 7 little babies. So the boys took turns, jumped down out of the barn, ran out and scared the mother pig, and she would turn away and start to run, and then she'd stop and come back and chase him. And so it became my turn, which I was afraid to do, but I did it anyway. I got down and ran out and half-heartedly tried to scare her, and she started chasing me, turned around, ran back into the barn, and climbed up where we were up on the roof. And coming up, there was a wire with straw on it, and I stepped on that wire to get up to the next level, and my foot slipped and went down into a hole, the rest of the fence or whatever. And when I came back up, my leg was bleeding profusely, really bleeding. Well, that scared the boys half to death, so they jumped down, and all 3 of us ran for the house with Mother Pig on our heels. We got almost to the house, and the neighbor, Leo Rasmussen's mother, was out hanging her laundry, and she saw us coming in the blood, and she emptied her basket of clean, wet laundry on the ground into the dirt. That impressed me. And come running over and scooped me up in that basket and set me on the fence post. And then ran and got my mother. I don't know how I balanced her, if it was a wide thing, I don't know. Anyway, Mom come running out, and they tried to fix it a little bit. They tried to stop the bleeding and everything. When Dad came home, they looked at it, and the doctor was in Soda Springs, which I think is about 10 miles away, 15 miles away. And he cost money, and they just didn't have money. And so they chose to fix it right there. Well, it had gone clear through all the layers of the skin, and the flesh was sticking up in little lumps all over. And the tear was about that long and about that upper right hand, right above the knee. And all summer long, I had to, every morning, I would come out in the kitchen. Mom would have me sit on one chair, and then she had a chair facing me. She'd put a bucket on the floor and pour warm water over my wound to loosen the bandage, and then she'd change the bandage. Well, the bandage stuck to the flesh and hurt, and I'd cry and I'd pull it. I wouldn't let her pull it off. I'd pull it off, but it was an eighth of an inch at a time with many tears, and I still have that scar. It finally started to grow white skin out from the edges, or I think that's the way it went, and it's all funny and wrinkled, and it's a funny scar. Anyway, that was one of our big adventures while we lived there.
That's good that didn't get infected.
Oh, yes. Well, she poured hydrogen peroxide over it, and it would bubble, and I thought she was poisoning me there for a while.
Okay, it says Christmas.
Oh, Christmases. I wanted to talk about Christmas. It's so important to all of us. And, you know, we did know that Christmas celebrated Jesus Christ's birth. So apparently they had told us some stories. I remember Mom had a book, and it was about that big, and it was a red cover, and then you opened it, and there were pictures with onion skin over them, sheer paper over them. And the picture I remember most is Samson pulling those pillars down with his strong arms and his long hair. Anyway, we would look at that sometimes, so I think Mom did give us some instruction. Anyway, Christmases, as you can imagine, were skinny. And we always had a car or a truck because Dad had to have it for work. And so we would get in that truck and drive to Ingham, to his parents' house, and have Christmas there. And, you know, it's in the middle of winter, and only 3 people, Mom and Dad and the baby Neil, could sit up front. So Dad got a hold of an old packing crate. It might have been a refrigerator crate or something. Put it in the back of the truck. They put blankets in it and pillows. And the 4 of us crawled in there and rode to Ingham. Boy, they'd be in jail now if they did that.
Wow. So was that fun for you, or was it miserable?
Oh, no, we had a ball back there. Peggy was a storyteller, and she would tell us stories. She'd make up stories and tell them, and we loved her stories. Anyway, so Christmas, my grandmother and grandfather that lived in Grace, Charlie and Sarah Ashton Gardner, they didn't have electricity or running water. And so while we were there, we went up to the outhouse. If it was the middle of the night, we used the chamber pot. There were no lights, and so there were coal oil lamps all over. So the lighting was very dim. And the adults would sit around the big table and play cards, and we kids would play. They had a kitchen, a pantry, they called it a milk room, and they had a big old milk separator with shelves and arms made out of metal. I don't know how they did it, but they separated the milk in that separator. I don't know why. I don't know if they used some for cottage cheese. I know she made butter. I remember watching her make butter. Anyway, they had a cook stove, no electricity, and on each end of the cook stove were these big reservoirs that water could be in there. And so for baths and things like that, that's where you got your hot water, which was the same as our cook stove in Grace. We took baths in the middle of the kitchen in a tin tub. Anyway, she cooked delicious Christmas dinner, except for the mincemeat pie. I hated the mincemeat pie. Anyway, it was good food. And then we'd all go into the living room in the evening and sit around the tree and open what scanty little presents were given to each other. I remember one year Grandma Gardner gave each of us young girls, the cousins and me, a pair of panties. And we were so embarrassed to open that package and hold up panties. you know, that was shocking in those days. Anyway, I remember one night we were sitting around the tree, and Grandpa brought in a bucket of water and a bucket of sand and set them in the corner. And then he went over to the tree, and they had decorated the tree with popcorn and stuff. And they had little candles in little holders, and he lit those candles.
Wow.
And blew out the coal oil lamp. And I remember that feeling of mystery, and oh, it was so neat. I remember that. And then while it was lit, one of the uncles or somebody read out of Matthew, Mark, Luke, or John, I don't know where from, but we all felt so solemn and sacred. Anyway, those were good times. There was a hill from their house down to the main road, and we would sleigh ride down that hill. And we didn't have the nice warm winter clothes everybody has now. So I remember wrapping up in one of Grandma's old coats and lying on the snow, on the sleigh, and then two people laid on top of me. And we went down the hill. Then you had to walk clear back up the hill. That wasn't so fun. But those were good memories and good days. And the adults were all so jolly and happy. You know, for Christmas, we got a present for Christmas. I remember one year, Shirley and I got these little rubber dolls that you could feed the doll, and it would make her go to the bathroom, which we thought was really something. Anyway, we had fun. What have I got next, Holly?
I was going to ask you, is there a favorite gift is that your favorite gift you remember getting or giving for
No,
Christmas?
like most kids, I was never satisfied. We got the Sears Montgomery Ward's, I don't know, catalog, and there was 2 or 3 pages devoted to Christmas and toys. That's all. There weren't that many things then on the market and everything. Anyway, they had these beautiful little girl dolls, and they had curly hair and beautiful little dresses, and they sat in a row on the page, and Shirley and I, oh, I want one of those so bad, and we asked Santa Claus and wrote a letter and did everything, but we never, ever got the doll.
Yeah.
Never got the doll. And then I got through with dolls and didn't want a doll, but I remember in the 5th grade, I got a doll. And I should have got it out. I'll get it out and show it to you next time.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I've still got that little doll.
Oh, that would be fun to see.
When we were in the 6th grade, I believe it was, I was still sleeping in a youth crib thing. And Shirley and Peggy slept in the bed, in the girls' bedroom. And we we came in to see what Santa Claus had brought early in the morning. And there was not much under the tree, and there was a letter on the tree, and it said, "Dear Dorothy and Shirley, you get a new bunk bed for Christmas. You're going to have beds." And oh my gosh, hooray, hooray. And Shirley said, "I get the top bunk." I was mad at her for probably a year because she had the presence of mind to claim the top bunk.
That's funny. Another question that came up when you were talking is about your baths. I've heard you talk a little bit about how often and in what order. So do you want to
Oh yes,
tell that?
we bathed once a week. It was probably Saturday night. That seems to be the typical time. And Mom would heat up the stove, and what a chore for her. Her life was hard. And then empty those buckets into the tub.
Did you
And
have water coming into the house, or did she have to go
Yes,
outside
Dad.
to get the water?
When Dad plumbed that toilet in the bedroom, he also plumbed the kitchen sink for cold water. But you had to heat it in those reservoirs in the stove. Anyway, with the kids, he would first Peggy would get the bath because she was the oldest, and then Shirley, and then me, and then Neil, or Don. No, Shirley, Peggy, Shirley, Dorothy, and then Don, the oldest brother, and then Neil, when he got old enough to do that. Otherwise, she bathed him some other way. And I don't know when Mom and Dad ever took a bath. I never saw them. But when we were bathing, the other people had to go in that bedroom and sit.
Yeah,
So,
that is different.
Oh, and she had to empty the tub when it was
that's
finished.
true. Just take bucket by bucket outside.
No, Don and Dad would pick up the tub and carry it outside and empty it.
Where would you store the tub? Like, was it how?
It was hanging on the outside of the house, on a nail on the wall. You'd see that all over town. Tubs hanging outside, just round middle.
Okay, your next one says grandparents.
Oh, okay. I told you about my grandma and Grandpa Gardner. Grandma looked a lot like Shirley. She was a round lady, not real fat, but just probably like me, nice and chunky. And she was a good cook. I remember her making pies. I remember her kneading bread. And when she'd knead the bread, her arms would shake right here. I remember that. And I'll have to tell you a story about kneading bread. My grandma and grandpa, Charlie and Sarah, lived in Ingham. Sarah Ashton lived with the Ashton family, and I'll tell you a story about her. Anyway, Grandpa was courting two ladies. One was my grandmother, Sarah, and the other, I don't know who she was. And one summer day, hot summer day, excuse me, he thought, I need to get married. I want to get married. I'm going to pick one of those ladies today and get married. And so he went to the first lady, and she was kneading bread. And that's hard work to flop that dough around. And when you've got 8 kids, you're making a huge amount. And so it was hot, and he saw that she started to sweat while she was talking to him and working. And pretty soon a drop of sweat run down onto her nose, and she's kneading the bread, and he looked at her and he thought, if that drops into that bread, I'm not marrying her. And it did, and he didn't. He married my grandma. And then my grandmother's story, I might as well tell you now, although it's written down probably more eloquently. But anyway, Grandma Gardner lived in England. I think she was born there, her and her little brother. Her mother was some kind of an entertainer. And one of her early memories that she told about was being in the dressing room where her mother was getting ready to go on stage. And of course it was the day of the big bustles and the tight waists, and so the mother is very glamorous and has on makeup, and she has a feather boa that comes around her shoulders. I think she was a singer. Came around her shoulders. And Grandma and her little brother were in the room. And then this man came in the room, and Grandma said, okay, you kids, this is, I don't know how she said it, this is your uncle, and you are going to go live with him now. And so she kissed them goodbye, and they left and came to America, to Ingham, Idaho. That was in London that this happened. Came to Ingham, Idaho, and never heard from their mother again.
And this was
my father's mother, Sarah Ashton Gardner. Wow. And her mother, which would be my great-grandmother, eventually got married and moved again, I guess, and got married and moved back to, I don't know, I guess her husband must have died or something. And she moved back to America, to Nampa, Idaho. And they lived in a nice house there. When Peggy lived in Nampa, she took me by that house. And it was a nice big 2-story house with a big front porch and everything. And her mother lived there all through the years then, and never once contacted him.
Oh, that's sad.
It is sad. And when she was about to die, she said, I want to see Sarah. And so somebody, a messenger, a letter to her brother, I don't know what, and came and he went up and said, Sarah, your mother is dying and would like to see you. And I'll take you to Nampa to see her. And she said, why would I want to go see my mother? I've lived here. Well, they moved into that house in 1900, and this might have been 30s or 40s. She says, I've lived here all these years, and she's never once written or called. Well, they didn't have a phone. She never once tried to contact me. So why should I go see her? So she didn't.
So she didn't. Wow.
And so
Wow.
Grandma Sarah was always kind of discontented. She felt like she could have had a better, more glamorous life if her mother had kept her, you know, with the stage and everything. And so they tell a tale that whenever that car motor started, whenever Grandpa was going to go to town or anything, he'd no more look around than she'd be sitting beside her with the purse. That car didn't leave without Grandma in it. She wanted more excitement. But she was a loving grandmother and talked to us and fed us. Yeah, she was a good grandma. Oh, and so grandparents, I guess you want to hear about the other side.
Yes.
Which is a longer story because my mother talked more than my dad did. Men don't do that much. Some men do. Lloyd does. Anyway, my mother's father was Elbert Frederick Ziegler, and his wife was Patience Bates Ziegler. That was my mother's parents. And they were married. Didn't I tell a story?
I recorded it on just an audio file on Monday Night Dinner.
Shall I tell it?
Yeah, I think go ahead and tell it because
Okay.
then we'll just use this instead of that recording.
All right. I thought it sounded
Yeah.
familiar. Anyway, my grandmother Patience was pregnant. She was going to have a baby. And there was no school out around the Thatcher area where Grandpa lived at that time. And so he left his wife, Patience, and the three daughters, Mom 13, Aunt Lydia and Aunt Dean, we called her, 9, and Aunt Ruth was only 2 or 3 years old. And that's Marjorie Ruth. So he rented a duplex, part of a duplex in Blackfoot, Idaho, where his parents lived on Cleveland Street. He rented them a duplex on the main road through Blackfoot. It's right at the beginning of town. I could show it to you. Anyway, he rented that duplex, and Mom and the Grandma and the 3 girls lived there, so that when she had the baby, there would be a doctor and the girls could go to school. So they were living there. I don't know what time of year it was that this happened. I think it was in the summer or fall. I don't know. Anyway, they ate dinner one night, and then her mother got sick, and they all went to bed. And about 2 or 3 in the morning, her mother came and shook my mother and said, Louise, get up, I need help. And so Mom got up, and she said, take me to the outhouse. So they went out there. And then in the next hour or 2, they made many trips to the outhouse. And she was just steadily getting in more and more pain and all bent over with pain. And finally she said, run next door to the other part of the building and knock on the door and get the nurse. She lived there. Get the nurse to come and look at me. So Mom went over and beat on the door to wake her up and brought her back over to their side. And the nurse looked at her and was alarmed, so she went back to her side and called the doctor. And the doctor said, oh, she'll be all right. I'll come and see her in the morning. And they hung up, and she died about an hour later. And they always said it was from food poisoning. They had had some kind of a tuna fish casserole or something for dinner. And when dinner was over and the dishes done, or whenever, Patience, the mom, scraped out the rest of the tuna that had clung to the edges of the can, a few flakes probably, and ate them. And they said that that's what killed her. And I never believed it. Not even when I was a young girl, I didn't believe it. And later in life, when I found out that my mother had had a miscarriage, a tubal pregnancy between Peggy and Dawn and Shirley and I, in those 3 years, there'd been a tubal pregnancy. And she told us how bad the pain was and how awful it was. She tried to walk out on the street to get it taken care of, nothing. Anyway, I always thought that maybe patients had a tubal pregnancy.
Do you know how far along she was?
I have no idea. But I know they probably stayed in Grace in September. I would imagine he set them up for school would be in September. And I don't think she was very far along, 3 or 4 months.
Yeah.
But they were going to spend the winter there and let the girls go to school. And so she died, and a few years later, I don't know how long, I could look it up, Grandpa lived in Thatcher on a big ranch called the Diamond P, I think. Peterson and Ziegler were in business together, farmed together. Well, they split up and Grandpa moved over to Grace. But while he was still in Thatcher, they did have an elementary school, 1st through 8th grade. They needed a teacher. Grandpa was on the school board, and so he advertised. And this young lady from either Iowa or Ohio, I think it was Iowa, came out on the train and went to work teaching school there. And her name was Esther Burns or Burner. I can't remember. I think it was Burner. Anyway, she started teaching school. And of course, when she got there, Grandpa's the one that picked her up in Grace at the train, took her to her place that she was going to board and room. They got acquainted, and they started to date, and they got married. And they had one more child, Fred Ziegler. And Fred was my uncle, although he was only about 6 years older than me. And he turned out to be a lawyer, and then a judge, and then a juvenile judge. Wow. Nice man. He and his wife and Doyle and I went around together for a year or two. Mm-hmm. And then he had a terrible aneurysm, died at age 59.
Oh, wow. So did your mom ever talk much about how she felt about her mom dying? Was that really hard? I mean, it was, but did she talk a lot about it?
Not a whole lot. I asked her, when she died, they couldn't move to the ranch. Mom had to go to school. And so Grandpa farmed them out with different relatives. And I asked Mom about that. Wasn't that so hard? She said, oh no, they were all wonderful to me. They treated me just like their own children. They gave me chores. It was just like I was one of the family. They were wonderful. And the younger daughter, Lydia, I don't know what they did with her and the baby, Aunt Ruth. But in the summertime, Mom would go home to the ranch. It was in Grace then. And she would do all the cooking for the hired men, for the whole family, at age 13. Wow. So in the morning, they would make this tremendously big breakfast. And then between morning and lunch, they'd make pies. They usually made 2 pies a day. Mom laughs about one day, her and Lydian, the 9-year-old girl, helped. And they were so hot in that kitchen with that big stove going with pies in the oven. And they took off their dresses, and they were cooking in their little petticoats. And whenever they'd think somebody was coming, they'd hurry and put on their dresses. But she cooked tremendous amounts of food when she was 13. And then when the thrashers came through, they would travel the area and do the thrashing at the different farms. And I don't know how many there were, but I imagine 8 or 10 guys, big old strong men. She had to cook for all of them too. And so Grandpa's sister, my great Aunt Mary, would come to the ranch and stay during thrashing to help Mom cook. So, wow. What a funny life. Yeah. Mom tells Grandpa, her dad, was a big man. Big, this way. Not very tall, but big. And my brother Don was so much like Grandpa Ziegler. Grandpa Ziegler was a great joker. He always had a laugh for something. And Peggy told the story about how one day he was going to go out and do some chores or something around, and he asked Peggy to ride with him. So they went here and there and did what he had to do. And then they were driving along, and he says, oh, look, there's where Mrs. lives. Let's stop and see if she has any good pie today. She makes good pie. And so they got out of the wagon and went around the house to the back kitchen door, knocked. No one answered. So Grandpa said, oh, well, let's just go in and see. So they went in. Well, there was a pie cooling on the table. And Grandpa got out a couple of plates and forks and cut the pie and made pie. And Peggy was astounded and scared. And, you can't do this. We can't do. Oh, no, she'll be fine. She'll be fine. Well, he had set it up with her before they ever went. But he pulled a good joke on Peggy. He ran for county commissioner. And he had to go to Washington, D.C. on business for something. And his friends bought a pair of fancy little panties and put them in his suitcase. So when he got home, Esther found these.
Uh-oh.
But she knew it was a joke. He was always funny. I remember, he's really the only adult I ever remember holding me on their lap. And one day he called me wee one because I was built so small. And one day he pulled me up there and he was talking to me. He said, you know, Glennie, a wee one, he called me wee one. You know, wee one, a lot of religions will tell you that they're the only true religion. But I want you to remember this. All religions have something good in them. And whatever church you belong to, you will find the good in it. He said, don't let any of them tell you that they're the only true one, because that isn't true. There's a lot of good churches. So that was kind of hard to overcome too, with him saying that and my dad saying what he said. They were all kind of anti-religious. Nobody went to church in either family. I think Grandma Gardner went to church, the LDS church sometimes, but Grandpa smoked. Grandpa Ziegler smoked cigars, and Grandpa Gardner smoked cigarettes, and he'd roll his own, and he called them cheroots, Cheroots. I don't know. That's an old Southern word for it or something.
So your mom, you don't remember her sitting on her lap or anything? Your own mom?
I remember my mother hugging us and talking to us, and she would sing Shirley and I little songs while the kids were in school. She was kind and gentle and loving, but to get up and sit on her lap, I'm sure they held us, but I just don't remember. So did I tell you about the churchmen that came to our house in Grace? I did, didn't I?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
What else do you want to know?
Okay, let's see.
Oh, I remember one other thing that I will tell you. At Ziegler's well, I lived in Niter, Niter, which is a little town out of Grace, with one post office and a little store. Anyway, out in a gas station. That was the store, come to think of it. But anyway, now I can't remember what I was going to tell you.
Niter, just the...
Oh, my word. It's so lovely to get old and forgetful. And
I know, and we can't rewind it to watch what you were going to say.
Well, I will.
Grandpa Ziegler.
Yeah, I don't know. It's gone.
Okay. Well,
on the wings of a snow white dove that flew away. What else is on
Okay,
here?
next it says Soda Springs, first house, attic, fight with Shirley.
Okay. Is it time to quit?
No, keep going.
Okay. In 1939, when I was 7, we moved to Soda Springs. Dad thought the work might be better there. And we rented a house that I adored. It had a lawn. It had white picket fence. It was a white house with green shutters. And it had a huge yellow rose bush out in the corner of the front. I loved that place. And then back behind there was kind of farm buildings and things. Anyway, Don was like Grandpa Ziegler. And so one day, Mom and Dad were gone somewhere, and he said, Shirley, Dorothy, come and look and see what I discovered. And we went in to the hall area, and there was a trap door up there. And he said, I wonder what's up there. Let's look. And he got the ladder and he climbed up there and he moved the door over and looked around up there, said, "Oh my gosh." And he started down the ladder and he said, "There's a treasure up there. It's a treasure. We're rich." And Peggy said, "Oh, I want to see." And she climbed up and, "Oh my word, this is wonderful. Look at all these beautiful jewels." And we were, oh, all eyes. So she came down and they said, "Okay, Shirley, you go up and look." "No, I'm scared." She wouldn't climb the ladder. And so they told me to, and I went up and stuck my head through the hole. And all I could see was an empty attic with a big cardboard box sitting there, long and narrow. And I looked around and "There's no treasure up here." And they yelled up and said, "You have to look in the dirt to find the jewels." "Oh, okay." I start going through the dirt. It was kitty litter.
Oh, no.
Old dried out kitty litter. I was so mad at them. But that was a typical joke that Don would play. He was always playing tricks on us.
Fight with Shirley.
Oh, Shirley and I were born so close together, and she didn't walk and didn't talk. And so when I learned to walk, then she learned to walk. And when I started talking, she still didn't talk. And so she and I developed our own little language. And when Peggy went to college, she said that twins often do that. They'll get their own little patter between each other. And so when Shirley wanted something or needed something, she would tell me, and then I'd tell our parents what she wanted. So that's the way we were, and we were never apart. We were raised like twins. We were never apart. And so we didn't fight. And looking back, I'm sure it's because I bossed her and she did what I said. I remember one day we went to our little friend's house, and the little girl said, "Mama, this is Shirley and this is Dorothy. And I like Shirley, but Dorothy's too bossy." But Shirley wouldn't do things on her own. She would follow me, but she wouldn't do anything on her own. Anyway, we got along beautifully. So Mom and Dad went to the Oregon coast with their friends, Charlie and Wanda Erickson. And my Aunt Mary, great Aunt Mary, came and stayed with us to tend us. And we were out in the barnyard, and there were a bunch of neighbor kids playing and standing around. And I don't know what started it, but Don and Peggy and the kids all started goading us to fight. And
like fist fight?
Yeah, fight. And I don't know why, and I can't even remember if I was mad or not. But I know that we fought, and we got disgusted and quit and went in the house together and left him out there. But that is the only fight I ever remember with Shirley.
Wow.
The only other crosswords and things that we had was when we got older. Well, maybe even by then, I don't know. But she wouldn't do what she was supposed to do. She was just born with a rebellious streak and would not do what they told her to do. And so it seemed like I was always forcing her to do what she wanted, what they wanted, or talking her into it. And as an example is when we got in early high school, like junior high now, 7th grade, somewhere in there. One night I came home from someplace about 9 o'clock, and Shirley was home 10 o'clock, and she was in bed. And the whole kitchen had dishes and stuff all over. She hadn't done her dishes. They were hers that night. She hadn't done it. And I thought, oh my gosh, Mom and Dad are going to come home. Dad's going to be so mean he'll hit her or something. So I ran in the bedroom, and she was asleep, and I grabbed her shoulder and shook her and said, "Shirley, get up, quick. Mom and Dad are going to be home any minute. Let's get that kitchen clean." "No, I don't want to." I said, "You're going to get punished if you don't. Come on." And I drug her out of bed and took her out in the kitchen. And we hurried and cleaned it up. And just as we finished, we saw the car lights coming into the driveway. And we ran and jumped into bed and pretended to be asleep.
Just in the nick of time.
Yeah, the nick of time. But it seemed like I was always trying to make her do something. And she wouldn't do it. if it were illegal or wrong, she'd do it. It was dishes and such that she wouldn't do.
That's funny. Okay, school reading and math. Ulcers.
School reading. Well, I don't know. I could read by the time I got into school. Those funny papers did it for me, the comics. Anyway, I got in, and Shirley and Peggy and Don would bring their books home occasionally. And I got so I could read their books, you know, because I loved the stories and loved reading. And so when I got into 3rd and 4th grade in Soda Springs, I loved the reading class and I got real good grades in that. But the math class was dismal and I got bad grades and I hated math from then on. But I remember one day they got both of the classes together, 2 4th grades. And the teacher drew a big circle on the board and put the numbers like a clock, 1 through 12. And then she would write a number in the middle, like 3. And then she'd pick a child and draw a line from the 3 to the 8 or whatever she wanted. And the child was supposed to give her the answer. Well, we were in the back of the room, Shirley and I. And I couldn't see that. I couldn't see what was on that board at all. To me, it just looked like a black board. Anyway, she put a number in the middle and pointed to something. I don't know. And she pointed to another number. Well, then what's this one? I don't know. She pointed to the 3rd one and said, what's this one? I don't know. For crying out loud, I put a 0 in the middle. Everything is, the answer is 0. And you should know that. So I couldn't see. Yeah. And in geography class where they'd write all this stuff on the board and you're supposed to copy it in your notebook and learn it, she set a little chair under the board and I'd sit on that chair and stand up and look and sit down and write it and stand up and look and sit down and write it.
So she knew you couldn't see, and the other teacher.
And then when I got in the 5th grade in Pocatello, we had Mrs. Poshert, and she was quite strict. She was nice, though. But one day she got mad at me and said, wrote a note, take this home to your mother. And so I left school in the middle of the day, and Shirley had to stay there alone, which terrified her.
Oh, she wanted you right then to take it home?
To take it home right in the middle of the school day.
Wow. And
I went home, and Mom read the note to me, and it said, this child will not sit in my class again until there are glasses sitting on her nose. And when Dad came home, Mom said, we gotta go to the eye doctor. So they took me to a guy named Dr. Porges here in town, Pocatello. And glasses typically cost $20, $23. He put me into bifocals and charged $40. And my dad was outraged, you know.
Yeah.
But oh, what a miracle that was. We walked out of that office and oh my gosh, I was in a new world. We went into the dime store, and on the floor, it wasn't just a smooth brown floor. There were wooden boards and little cracks and pits, and the ceiling had a design on it, and the trees had leaves, and oh, it was a whole new world.
Yeah, I like that.
From then on, my glasses went on my nose first thing in the morning, and that was the last thing I did at night. Yeah. And I did it all my life until lately. And now my eyes don't want to do what I want them to, so I'm always doing this or this to try to see it. So I got a bunch of gadgets that help me a little, but I can't see through like this. I can't see through that anymore. Anyway, that's out of sync. What's next?
Okay, ulcers?
Oh, okay. Before I talk about ulcers, I remember what it was. Doyle had an aunt and uncle, Ken and Amy Chatterton. Amy was a school teacher in Soda, although I never had her. And she wrote a story about Christmas in Soda Springs during the war. Oh, yeah. And it's just a marvelous little story. And so I'm going to try to find it and have Holly put it on Facebook for you. Okay, and then what's next, did you say?
Ulcers.
Oh, my ulcer. I was so exclusive. I alone had an ulcer. My stomach hurt all the time. And it seemed like when I laid in bed, these big cords would raise up in my stomach and push against the skin.
And this is when you were little?
This is in Soda Springs when I was in the 3rd or 4th grade. And so my mother took me to Dr. Cackley. And Dr. Cackley told her I had an ulcer. And he put me on 1 yeast cake a day and 2 or 3 sections of a Hershey's chocolate bar. Twice a day. Wow. I was in heaven. The yeast cake I could do without, but the other, oh man, all the kids were so jealous of me.
I bet.
And I finally did get over the ulcers.
What? That's funny. Chocolate. Who knew? Geyser Hill.
Oh, well, in 1939 we moved to Soda, where the work was better, and I told you about the little white house we lived in. Mm-hmm. I don't know how much later, but we moved. My dad opened a shop in the downtown area near the drugstore that's still there. And Geyser Hill is right behind the drugstore. And then we lived just a little ways from there. And so that house was at the back of the shop. And we lived there, I don't know how long, but I remember one incident that was really scary when we lived there. Shirley and I were in bed asleep, and we heard all this commotion and went out in the living room. Mom and Dad were gone, and Peggy was babysitting. And the stove, the little monkey stove in the living room that kept the house hot, was red hot. I mean, it was red. And Peggy and Don were so scared, and so Don ran out into the street and found the man out there walking somewhere. It was like nighttime, I don't know what time. And Don told him, and the man come running in the house and saw it, and he told Peggy to get him a box of salt. And he took that salt and opened the door, which you couldn't even get near the stove. It was generating. Anyway, he did get the door open and threw that salt in there, and it diminished the fire. But that was a scary thing.
That is scary.
And we lived there. And then the last house we moved in Soda, now remember, we only lived there 2 years. But we lived in 3 houses. So the next one was up the main street, up the hill, and it was a nice little house. And the people that had lived there before had a piano, an old player piano that you pumped the pedals, and you got all this wonderful music. Put a roll in there, and the roll would go by, and the little cutouts would play the music. It was amazing. And we spent hours and hours and hours playing that old piano. And I know Peggy wanted to take piano lessons so bad, but they wouldn't let her. They didn't have the money probably. And when she got in college, she took a class in piano
lessons
and learned to play a little bit.
That's neat. Did you ever want to play?
Yeah. Oh, but what I really wanted to do was take dancing lessons and tap dancing. That was so neat. All my friends that took dancing, I wish I could go, but they didn't put out money for things like that.
The library.
Oh, Soda Springs had a library. It was right on Main Street. You left our house, the last house, and walked down, and it was right there. It was about 5 blocks away. And by the time I left Soda, I think I had read 90% of the books in the children's section. I would check out books. I got really, really sick while I lived in Soda. I think that was the sickest I ever was. I don't know what was wrong with me, but I was in bed. Oh, I told you that. And I went out of my head, is what they called it.
I don't remember hearing that.
Okay. I was in bed sick, and I don't remember much about it, except I remember my dad leaning down and kind of shaking me and saying, "Are you better now? Are you doing better?" And Mom told him then, she said, "She's been out of her head all day." So I don't know what was wrong with me, but I got better.
That's good.
Mhm.
Yeah, that's scary watching your kid get sick nowadays.
Yeah.
Back then.
We lived in Soda Springs then until the summer of 1942 when I was going to go in the 5th grade. And the reason we left Soda is because the war started. And I remember that day, it was Sunday afternoon, and Dad said, come and listen to this. And we all went in the kitchen, and this little radio that we had sat up on top of the refrigerator so the kids couldn't mess with it. And Dad had it tuned in, and it was all this news going on. And the man said, America has declared war on Japan. So we were in war. And Mom and Dad were very upset that we were in war. Dad was too young to go in the First World War and too old to go in the Second World War. So we lucked out. And I don't remember any uncles or anybody going
really?
to war, but almost everybody else did. So he got a better job. He got a job where he'd worked for himself those years in Grayson. So he got a job at Maurice Faraday's plumbing shop. And Peggy said it was Greens, but that was wrong. Anyway, he came here. We moved here when he came here in the winter and worked, and then he'd come home on weekends. Well, then when we moved over here, his boss got the job plumbing the camp that they rounded up all the Japanese on the West Coast and everything. And that was one of the camps that they put the Japanese in. That was a terrible thing. They went in and took their property and put them in a camp. They weren't cruel to them, but they wouldn't let him go. Anyway, he did the plumbing up there in Jerome on that camp. And I remember he'd come home on Friday night, and he came home the first night, and he had made $100. And we were just, $100? And Mom said, okay, you kids, you can each have $1 to spend at the grocery store. So Shirley and I we put our money together and bought this huge watermelon. And then we went out around the side of the house where you didn't go and ate and ate and ate watermelon. And then we shared some with the family, but we wanted to get ours first. I don't know what the other kids got.
That's fun.
But Soda Springs, we went to primary, and my mother even taught primary for a while. And I remember how nice that was to be included in that group. The things that primary did. I remember going to a dance at primary, and I don't know. But my parents never went to church there. So.
Comic books.
Oh, in Soda Springs, you could buy, the comics, they bring them in every month. And at the end of the month, if they haven't sold, they'd tear the front off the comic book and then sell them cheap. And so every month when I knew the day that they were going to do that, I'd run in there with my nickel, and I could buy 15 comic books for a nickel. I loved that.
So how did you earn your nickel? Did your parents just give you one, or did you have to earn your money?
I imagine we earned it, but I don't really remember.
How.
The first money I really remember earning was in Soda Springs. We were in the 4th grade, and this lady wanted Shirley and I to come and tend to her children. I guess Mom, I don't know how she found us. Anyway, we went over to her house, and she had 2 sets of twins. The babies were under a year, and the older ones were like 2.5 or 3. And then one other child. And we went in and watched the kids, played with them, got them all to bed. And one of the babies woke up and started to cry, and Shirley and I were trying to sleep on the couch together, spoon fashion. And that baby cried and cried and cried and cried. And I finally called Mom on the phone and told her, what will we do, this baby? And she told us a couple of things to try. Well, finally, the baby went to sleep at like 3 in the morning. And the woman, I don't know when she came home, but the next morning she woke us up and said, it's time to get up and go to school. And so we got up and she gave us oatmeal with nothing on it that was icky. But we ate it because you had to eat something to go to school. And she gave us 35 cents between us, which was riches. So I remember I spent mine on my half on tablets and pencils. I don't know, I surely did.
I was going to ask back to the library, did you have a favorite book that you remember reading as a kid?
I remember Nan of the Gypsies. It was like mystery books.
Mm-hmm. Mystery books.
Yeah, that was one of the, in a series, Nan of the Gypsies. I don't know, that's, oh, and I do remember some other books that I loved. They were by Osa and something Johnson. And they traveled in Africa on safaris and things. And the books were about their experiences. And I loved those books. There were a couple, 3 of them, I think. And I remember when I was so sick that time, I was reading those books.
That's neat. Okay, I think that was for it for Soda Springs, and then it went to Pocatello.
Okay, I think we better save that for another day.
Okay.
I think I'm
So we'll
done.
right there.
Okay.
Okay.
Well, I hope you kids enjoyed this. I know I sure enjoyed telling the stories. I'm sure you'll get tired of it, but I promise I won't be so detailed when I get in there.
Everybody likes the detail. Everyone commented, keep
Oh.
the detail. They like the detail.
Okay. Gluttons for punishment. Bye-bye.
Okay, let's see. I can't remember how to stop